Hello again. In this video, we're going to talk about Chapter 12 in your textbook, Speech Design. We're going to start with talking about audience and context, and then doing research to inform presentations, organization of presentation body, introductions and conclusions, and use of language. And a lot of things that we're going to talk about in this video will also be helpful tips for just structuring your argument and your informative and persuasive paper assignments. So pay attention to those kind of things too. So let's begin with the audience and context. Audience-centered speakers are seasoned presenters who can adjust or change the message mid-sentence to suit the audience's mood. They are also speakers who are aware of all the components involved in the communication process and pay particular attention to the audience. And one way we can accomplish this is by undergoing audience analysis, by which we ask ourselves a series of questions designed to answer one all-important larger question: who is my audience, in order to effectively frame a presentation. It's also important to do context analysis, which is asking ourselves a series of questions to analyze the context. Presentations do not occur in a vacuum, so we have to consider how relevant is our information to our audience. Also consider what about the socio-political climate impacts our perceptions about a topic. And also consider the physical context, like the audience size, the venue, any external noise in the environment, and etc. So it's also important to conduct a lot of research to inform your presentation, so we can support that ethos, our credibility, right? And logos, the type of information that we present. And we can get our information from internal sources, which is information that comes from within the organization, such as reports, policies, or interviews with employees and or customers. And we also have external sources, which are information that come from outside the organization, such as government agencies, the competition, government in general, and the media. The research that you need to do in order to inform any presentation or your informative and persuasive papers in this class should come from a variety of sources. Depending on the topic, you may use internal sources, external sources, or a combination of both. If you have done your job as a researcher, you will have a lot more information at your disposal than you actually need. So at that point, you need to determine what you should include. And to do that, you should ask yourself a series of questions, like what information does this audience need to know so that they understand this topic and or are persuaded by my argument? What information is most relevant to the audience? What information would be most interesting or new or different to this audience? And what information is needed to support my specific purpose effectively? So with all that in mind, and after we've done our research, we can get into the organization of the presentation body. And we'll start by talking about how we can organize the body. So we must develop clear organization within the body of our presentation or your informative and persuasive papers, so that it's not typical or unmemorable. Typical and unmemorable speakers will typically take all the information they have available and just lump it together as 3 main points. But there's a lot more effective ways that we can go about doing this. One of those ways is to follow Monroe's motivated sequence, which is an organizational pattern that is often used to persuade in business and professional settings. And it follows a 5-step process. The first is to engage the audience. So you have to pique their interest, establish common ground, and in some way relate to them so that they want to pay attention to you. Next, we state the problem and why change is needed. So we establish what exactly the problem is and exactly how problematic it is. So why is it bad? Why do we need to change this problem or solve it? Then we want to provide a potential solution for a problem. We're not very persuasive if we just talk about problems and scream on top of a mountaintop of people yelling about problems. we have to provide some way to effectively solve this problem. Next, we want to discuss the benefits of the solution. So why does it behoove your audience to solve this problem that you're presenting and trying to persuade them that they should be involved in, or at least in agreement with? And then end with a specific, clear call to action. What do you want your audience specifically to think, believe, or do about this problem? And throughout this sequence, you want to incorporate transitions, which are any word or phrase that helps guide the listener from one point to the next. So within the body of your presentation or paper, clear transitions should appear between your main points. So as you complete the discussion of your first main point and move to your next main point, it would be a good idea to maybe add an internal summary followed by an internal preview for those in-between parts. If you have a lot of main points, like more than 3, you can also use signposts instead, which are words or phrases that let the audience know where you are within the presentation and that you are transitioning without using a formal internal summary preview statement like a transition. So words like first, second, third, fourth, etc. Because presentations with more than 3 points, if you have those huge transitions between all of them, that can be overkill, so you might not need it. It's also important to have effective introductions and conclusions. In my own writing, these are things that I sometimes struggle with, and it can be a good idea to write these things last after you organize the body, so you know where you're going and how you want to end it. But an introduction is the part of the presentation or paper in which you gain attention, introduce the topic, develop credibility, relate the topic to the audience, and preview your main points. So introductions should always end with a preview of your main points. This will help the audience transition from the introduction to the body, and it will also reinforce your message. So start off with something that captures the audience attention, like a story, a quote, or a statistic, etc. The conclusion is the final part of your presentation. So signal that you are concluding, provide a summary, and leave a strong impression. A well-designed conclusion can elevate a presentation from average to excellent, but a bad conclusion can make an otherwise great presentation or paper kind of fall flat and go. So make sure you end by leaving a strong impression. You can end with a quote or a story, refer back to something you talked about in the beginning, or use some memorable statistic or something else that people will remember. Also be sure to avoid a false close. When you signal to the audience that you are concluding, make sure you actually conclude. Don't signal that you're wrapping up and then continue to introduce more new information. This can get your audience a little disgruntled, and they will remember that disgruntled feeling rather than all the great information that you're trying to tell them or get them to believe and know. So now we'll talk about some of the ways we can use language to make our arguments even better. So we want to use formal language, like we want to cut out cuss words or swearing, try not to use slang or texting language or colloquialisms or anything like that. Your language does need to be more formal than casual conversations in a presentation, speech, or paper. But don't be too formal so that what you're saying is over your audience's heads. Like, use jargon when appropriate, but make sure if it's not familiar to your audience that you also define it in more understandable terms for them. There are a few language devices that we can also use to help make our argument more memorable. For example, imagery we can use to help the audience paint a picture with words by using metaphor or other types of descriptive language. Repetition is also a super powerful language device. By repeating a phrase or creating parallel structure within your presentation, you create a sense of anticipation for audience members. Think about the first time you hear a really catchy song on the radio. Research actually shows that young generations today prefer songs with repetitive lyrics. So when you get the song stuck in your head for the first time, honestly, it's usually the chorus, the part that repeats several times in the song. So imagine how powerful that sort of same process can be used in your speech delivery or your papers. So that is all I have on chapter 12. We talked about the importance of analyzing our audience and our context, doing research to inform our presentations using both internal and external sources as they are available to us, how we can organize our presentation body and incorporate transitions and signposts between main ideas, the importance of powerful introductions and conclusions, and then some ways we can use language to further support our delivery of our topic. So that is all, and I will see you guys next week.